Chapter 1271, Seven Lights. Upon hearing Indigo Light Isis's reply, Klein's mind tensed up as he recalled the Crimson Moon, the Brown Planet, the Scarlet Planet, the Blue Planet, and Gold Planet. He felt like they were looking down at him from above with their eyes. Silently, a connection was established. The impending fatal corruption made all of Klein's worms of spirit feel uneasy. As an angel in control of Saphira Castle, Klein had many ways to sever this connection. Firstly, he could use the status and strength of a complete mythical creature. Secondly, he could suppress his anchors, using the mental imprint the primordial one left in him to offset it. Thirdly, he could use the aura of Saphira Castle that he could now utilize one step further. Without any hesitation, he chose the simplest and most convenient method to not leave behind any hidden dangers. A grayish-white fog appeared around him as all the celestial body projections in his mind vanished. After being stunned for a second, Klein organized his words and said,
"There are that many outer deities?"
Indigo Light Isis symbolized the domain of prayers. He touched the ruby ring on his right hand and nodded. Ever since the oldest one awakened and split apart, the most powerful outer deities in the entire universe gathered around this tiny solar system. Some of them wished to retrieve their Sephiroth characteristics that had been ripped from them and were attracted here. Some of them have the hope of getting neighboring Sephiroth and high-level characteristics which they can accommodate. Oldest one. The Seven Lights address the original creator as the oldest one, and not the primordial one. In terms of the name's meaning, there isn't much difference. Klein deliberated and asked,
Sephiroth and characteristics that were ripped and attracted over?
He could understand the rest of the words Indigo Light had mentioned, and he had even made some speculation towards such matters. There was just one point that caught him by surprise. Blue Light Kuthumi, who was a symbol of the domain of cogitation and used love and wisdom as a characteristic of his body, explained kindly, "Your Excellency, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics." Seeing Klein nod, the thick-bearded elder with a sapphire tied around his forehead continued, "This isn't just a law for the sequence pathways. It's also suitable for describing the Sephiroth and the characteristics related to the outer deities, especially the ones that were directly nurtured and created from the oldest one. For example, the Mother Goddess of Depravity, Son of Chaos, and the Mother Tree of Desire. As for the other outer deities, we aren't too sure. In short, the three great old ones, who lost a portion of their Sephiroth and characteristics, are most concerned and proactive when it comes to invading the real world. They have been trying to influence the spirit world and corrupt us." Klein nodded slightly and asked, in a confirmation-seeking tone,
In other words, a portion of the current 22 pathways and 9 Sephiroth belong to the outer deities?
The amethyst-wielding Saint Germain, who symbolized the domain of ritualistic magic, took the opportunity to answer, "Yes. When the total number of 22 pathways and the 9 Sephiroth was reached, everything finally reached a balance. This might be the mysticism connection that originated from the oldest one." Klein thought for a moment before saying,
What are they exactly?
Saint Germain, whose face was suffused with a faint purple glow, making him look rather mysterious, said, "For example, the moon and the earth pathway both belong to the Mother Goddess of Depravity. She is an existence that stands atop all the outer deities. Even after a portion of her Saphira, that is, the brood hive, was ripped from her, that remains the case. She is the sovereign of all the feminine forces in the entire universe." Just as Saint Germain said that, Greenlight Serapis suddenly laughed. In fact, after carefully analyzing the 22 pathways, you'll discover that the Moon and Earth pathways are the two most contradictory ones. The Demoness pathway represents the oldest one's feminine side. The Red Priest pathway represents the masculine side. This happens to form a deformed aspect of balance, but the Moon and Earth can also make. Beyonders of the corresponding pathways turn into feminine creatures at high sequences. There are no pathways that balance it. Seeing Klein wince his eyebrows, Greenlight, who had the long hair of an artist, added with a smile, "The Earth Pathway's Sequence 2 is Desolate Matriarch, and the Moon Pathway's Sequence 1 is called Beauty Goddess. Therefore, the Sanguine only have queens and no male princes." Then was the ancient goddess Lilith originally a male and a female? Klein mumbled inwardly and asked thoughtfully,
The primordial moon is the mother goddess of depravity?
Red Light Ayur Moria, who was wearing a diamond crown, nodded in a dignified manner. Yes, she occupies the moon, and through her own level and influence on the brood hive and the uniqueness of two pathways, she has gradually infiltrated into reality. The primordial moon is her manifestation in this world. After saying that, Ayur Moria paused and said, Her full title is Mother Goddess of Depravity, Origin of Evil, the Indestructible, and the Brood Hive of Filth. Klein recalled the exaggerated reaction of the moon when he first learned of the secret of the cosmos. He suddenly felt a chill as he hurriedly asked,
The devil and prisoner pathway come from the mother tree of desire?
Yellow Light Venethan, who was wearing a lemon-yellow robe, sighed. Yes, her full name is the Mother Tree of Desire, Father to Devils, Perpetual Blatherer, and the Heartless God. Therefore, she had seized the opportunity when something happened to the chained god, easily achieving her goal of corruption.
Mother, father, is that fellow a man or a woman? Yes, to an existence at this level, it's normal for there to be no distinction between genders. Different incarnations have different images. She even wanted to bear a child for me. From the present state of the chained god? If I had been caught, I'd probably be the one bearing the child. Then, the child will inherit Saphira Castle, allowing the Mother Tree of Desire to indirectly corrupt and control this Saphira. From this angle, perhaps the prisoner pathway's desire of indulgence is the proper way of acting. However, this correct path leads to the outer deity, so temperance is still the better one.
Klein frowned slightly as he raised a question he had guessed before, hoping to get an answer.
Since there are so many outer deities, why haven't they entered our world yet?
From what Klein had learned to date, he could guess that, even if it were only the Mother Goddess of Depravity and the Mother Tree of Desire, the outer deities could easily resolve existences like the former 7 deities, the True Creator, and the Primordial Demoness. The plump orange light Hilarion smiled and said, All our suffering comes from the oldest one. All our luck comes from the oldest one as well. Not only did he leave behind his spirit, will, branding, and corruption, but he also left behind the Sephiro, characteristics, and power. The remnants of his power formed an invisible barrier outside the planet, preventing the outer deities from directly invading it. However, with the passage of time, his consciousness and powers haven't truly been revived, and his will and powers are fading. At the end of the 4th epoch, this reached a very serious state. The invisible barrier produced cracks, and the 7 deities had no choice but to move their divine kingdoms into the astral world to mend the cracks. It's no wonder that the true deities from the 4th epoch could walk the land, but they rarely descended in the 5th epoch. Klein immediately came to a realization and asked,
When the oldest one's will and powers decline further, the invisible barrier will vanish and usher in the apocalypse?
Orange Light Hilarion, who had been smiling all this while, glanced at Yellow Light Venethan. His expression immediately turned serious. Yes. When the time comes, the Mother Goddess of Depravity, the Mother Tree of Desire, and the Son of Chaos and all the other outer deities would invade this planet. Even if the goddess becomes a great old one, she wouldn't be able to withstand so many of them. The other Sequence 0 deities would be able to tie down 1 or 2 outer deities together, and that would be considered a miracle. It would take 9 to fight 1, or even more. Klein's scalp tingled as he once again experienced the meaning of despair.
No wonder it was called the apocalypse.
With his upheaval in emotions, he immediately felt the primordial one's mental imprint strengthen, and more of it had eroded what the anchors had fixed in place. Klein quickly calmed himself down and allowed the fragile balance to reappear again.
This is the reason why the corruption from underground will naturally dissipate as long as one doesn't approach it or resist.
Klein recalled some of the mysticism knowledge he had previously grasped. Orange Light Hilarion gave an affirmative answer. Your Excellency, you're completely right. Klein immediately made other connections.
Does that mean that the closer one is to the apocalypse, the easier it is for one to advance? This is because the primordial one's will is fading. His awakening will become difficult, to the point of not waking up again?
Red Light, Moretti thought for a moment and said, this is the reason why the 7 deities have only waited until recently to set their sights on above the sequences before taking concrete action. However, the oldest one's will can dissipate, but his spirit will remain forever. It won't be erased unless the entire universe returns to the singularity. Therefore, the corresponding high-level existences still have the possibility of having the oldest one awaken in them. The higher the level, the greater the possibility. The corresponding influence and corruption will become more serious. The extraordinary power and the curse that can never be broken are always 2 sides of the same coin. Klein sighed. Forcefully suppressing a problem that wasn't at his level, he asked,
Do you know the potion formula for Attendant of Mysteries?
The amethyst-wielding Saint Germain replied, there's a corresponding mystery attached to such knowledge. It's not in the spirit world, but according to our observations, the Attendant of Mysteries ritual should be closely related to the spirit world. Orange Light Hilarion immediately smiled at Klein. Your Excellency, if you require anything, we'll provide our full support.
This fervor makes me a little afraid, just like facing Arrodes.
Klein nodded slightly and prepared to change the topic. After some consideration, he asked solemnly,
Do you know of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings?
He translated the title using Elvish. The 7 lights immediately fell silent. They looked at each other and didn't reply for a while. After a few seconds, Orange Light Hilarion sighed. We still can't be sure if you're him. He was a great old one who had been active during the end of the previous civilization up to the mid-stages of the first epoch. He is the great ruler above the spirit world that we speak of. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings is his title in the Western continent. The other title is King of Space-Time, Beacon of Destiny, embodiment of Sapphira Castle, dominator of the spirit world, and details. At this point, Orange Light paused and said, Lord of the Mysteries, Chapter 1272, Spring. The King of Space-Time, Beacon of Destiny, embodiment of Sapphira Castle, dominator of the spirit world, Lord of the Mysteries. So the mysteries mentioned by the ancient sun god refers to the Lord of the Mysteries. Klein silently repeated the titles as he felt the trauma in his heart increase. He immediately thought of a question and hesitated before saying,
Based on what I know, a long time before the last civilization ended, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings had already appeared.
After the 7 lights exchanged looks, the thin yellow light Venathan, who was translucent like other spirit world creatures, sighed and said, We weren't aware of that. When the previous civilization came to an end, the 7 lights from before had been wiped out when the oldest one awoke. We were the pure lights that were born from the spirit world during the first epoch. However, we have some guesses about the great ruler above the spirit world. Perhaps this can answer your questions. Klein perked up and wore an attentive look. Yellow light, Venathan continued. We suspect that some of the great old ones that were active in the first epoch were outer deities who had been directly attracted to this planet. Some of them came alive as Sephiroths. In other words, some great old ones were equivalent to the oldest one, embodiments of the different personalities he split into. Whatever separates will definitely converge, and whatever converges will definitely separate. This description isn't limited to beyonder characteristics, but also refers to the oldest one himself. As most of the Sephiro and characteristics are from this supreme existence, there are natural inclinations of convergence. And the oldest one is the amalgamation of all the contradictions in the universe. Once the Sephiro and characteristics are gathered, it will almost certainly separate.
Is this the crux and origins of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics? The genie is an unlucky outer deity who got attracted to this world only to encounter the Lord of the Mysteries?
Klein nodded slightly and didn't interrupt. He patiently waited for Yellow Light to share their guesses. Dressed in a lemon-yellow robe, Venathan glanced at Klein and said, "Perhaps the oldest one had already had an inclination towards separating while asleep. Therefore, his mind was split into different parts. He used different titles to secretly interfere with the real world and prepare for the separation that was bound to happen once his body woke up. For example, God Almighty or the Celestial Worthy."
A reasonable guess. It can explain many of my doubts.
Klein immediately felt enlightened. Aha! He deliberated and said,
In other words, you believe that the great ruler above the spirit world was a part of the oldest one. To a certain extent, he is equivalent to the oldest one?
"That's right." Orange Light Hilarion gave an affirmative response before comforting Klein. "Based on the present situation, the great ruler is also the same as the rest of the oldest one. His will and powers have faded over time. Your Excellency, regardless of you being him or not, it doesn't hinder you from putting up a certain level of resistance. Keep what's left of your humanity and reach a particular balance with him. Heh. Separation is inevitable."
What kind of consolation is that?
Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Then he realized a problem. Since the oldest one dissociated into different parts, the mental imprint in the body of a high-sequence beyonder of the corresponding pathway should also belong to the different great old ones.
If the primordial one which awoke in the ancient sun god's body is the God Almighty as described by the seven lights, then who would it be when the primordial one's mental imprint begins eating at me?
The answer to this question was very obvious. Without needing to think, Klein could answer it.
The Lord of the Mysteries, the dominator of the spirit world, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. In other words, it wasn't that the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings hadn't left any traces as he had previously believed. He had already awoken in Klein's body. F times CK.
Klein's entire body turned cold. He inexplicably experienced what the ancient sun god previously felt. At that moment, he was very worried that, one day, he would unknowingly become another person, becoming the resurrected Lord of the Mysteries, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings.
However, an awakening of this level is similar to what other angels have encountered. It's not as strong and irresistible as I had imagined it to be. This is because I'm different from the ancient sun god. I wasn't born with the status of an angel, or even in control of a uniqueness. I advanced step by step, and I was able to complete the digestion in different stages. If that's the case, I have to thank the grayish-white fog that sent the curtain into the forsaken land of the gods. Perhaps this involved the help of a particular or several existences. Yes, that's still not right. I've already become the owner of Sapphire Castle. There's no reason for the corruption and contamination I suffer to be the same as other Sequence 2 angels.
Klein secretly shook his head. He didn't raise the corresponding question to the seven lights. To him, this was one of his core secrets. He definitely couldn't let other existences know what his current state was like. In Meilan Butumalore, he raised his right hand and placed it to his mouth. He coughed lightly.
I roughly understand.
After chatting with the seven lights, Klein stood up and bowed.
Thank you for your answers.
It was our pleasure. May Your Excellency return to the throne of the great ruler above the spirit world as quickly as possible. The seven lights stood up at the same time, giving him a warm response.
Are they trying to curse me?
Klein teased himself as he politely sent away the seven pure lights. Following that, he activated teleport once again and returned to a secluded alley in Backland. Pressing his top hat on his head, Klein strolled down the street. The first thing that caught his eye was the crowd of all kinds of people and the hustle and bustle that formed a heat wave. Some people were wearing linen clothes, sawing down abnormally tall trees in groups of about 4 people. Some of them formed a team, busy repairing the streets and houses that didn't suffer too much damage. Some held desi pies and sweet iced tea in their hands, rushing past him as though they were rushing to their workplace. Some of them rode cargo carriages, carrying food, meat, and vegetables, all heading in different directions. Although most of these people wore simple clothes with plenty of visible stitches, and there were still signs of numbness and pain on their faces, the vitality their bodies exuded seemed to interweave into a light of hope before Klein's eyes. They were tenaciously brimming with life. They were like grass that tried their best to tear through stones after a cold winter. Keine Scholte. Klein slowed down his steps and gazed deeply at the bustling scene. Although he hadn't seen the tragedy in the later stages of the war, he had learned plenty from Miss Justice and Leonard. Furthermore, he had previously been traveling in the even darker and more repressed forsaken land of the gods. It was inevitable that he felt some uncontrollable emotions. Spring had arrived. Klein's expression gradually relaxed as the corners of his mouth curled up. He walked through the streets and alleys that were rebuilt after the war, and he walked all the way to St. Samuel Cathedral in Northborough. The square was filled with potholes. The workers were doing the first round of cleaning. A small flock of pigeons had returned and landed in this once familiar area. Klein looked around but didn't find any hawkers. All he could do was use historical projections as food and scatter it across the floor. As the pigeons flew over, he crossed the square and entered the cathedral where the bell tower was being repaired. He sat in the front pew of the prayer hall. Plainly, looking at the sacred emblem that was the crimson moon surrounded by stars, Klein took off his hat and clasped his hands. He closed his eyes in this tranquil environment. He gradually calmed down, feeling as if he was really praying. At this moment, Leonard, with much longer black hair and darker green eyes, walked down the aisle in a black trench coat and red gloves. He came near him and sat on the pew 2 spots from him and began praying. In the absolute silence, Klein opened his eyes, stood up, put on his hat, and walked past Leonard. When he reached the door, Leonard slowly got up and followed behind. One after the other, they arrived at a corner of the square not long after. Leonard looked at the few pigeons on the ground and seemingly mumbled to himself.
I'm already a high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks. In another 2 days, I'll return to the Holy Cathedral for some studies, as well as obtain a corresponding holy artifact.
In the final stages of the war, he advanced at the front lines to Sequence 4 Night Watcher.
You don't seem to be too happy.
Klein, who was standing beside Leonard, didn't turn his head as he looked at the pigeons. Leonard laughed self-deprecatingly.
I have no right to be unhappy. I was just thinking that the Battle of Gods ended so quickly, and the result was unexpected. Does it mean that the previous defeat and the difficulties that everyone suffered were nothing but bait?
Before today, I shared your views. I was also puzzled and frustrated, but now I'm a little lost. This might have been a necessity.
Klein didn't hide his feelings. Leonard fell silent for 2 seconds before looking down at the pigeon that was prancing around him.
That's what Old Man said too.
Without waiting for Klein to say another word, he turned his head and glanced at his former colleague.
You've become an angel?
Palais Zoroast had told him that what Klein had done previously was perhaps to prepare for his advancement to an angel.
Yes,
Klein nodded slightly.
but there isn't any glory or power in this. Only pain, curses, and responsibility.
Why?
Leonard subconsciously asked. Klein didn't reply immediately. He looked down at the shadow by his feet and turned to walk out the square. After a few steps, he turned his back to Leonard and muttered to himself,
You should still remember that sentence. We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness.
Leonard was taken aback. After a few seconds, he turned to look at Klein, but all he could see was Klein's back, which was just about to disappear around the corner of the street. He was wearing a half-top hat and a black trench coat. With a whoosh, the pigeons on the ground flew up into the light blue sky. Chapter 1273, The Poorer Roads. Klein didn't visit Benson and Melissa because the matters he was involved in were at too high a level. Approaching his siblings would only bring them disaster. For existences who didn't know Klein's original identity, Such acts would help them understand the relationship between Benson, Melissa, and Klein. To know of Klein's past experiences, this would make them confirm one thing. Klein still maintained his humanity and was still very concerned about his family. Therefore, staying away from Benson and Melissa was the best form of protection he could give them. Of course, Klein had already grasped the situation of his siblings through Miss Justice. During the war, Benson had displayed his experience and ability at the Ministry of Finance. He received many promotions and had become the deputy director of the 5th Department, and his annual salary reached £300. Melissa won the favor of her mentor Portland Moment and was given a chance to become a Beyonder. The chancellor of the Backlund University of Technology was a believer of the God of steam and machinery, so he had long become a Beyonder. He was currently a Sequence 7 appraiser. He wished for Melissa to become a Sequence 9 savant so that she could better absorb the knowledge and improve her memory. This established a good foundation for her in her subsequent development in the mechanical domain. This was Melissa's secret, but she wasn't able to hide from a spectator at the demigod level. Besides, Audrey definitely informed Klein that Melissa was more inclined to agree and would be making a decision in the next few days. Klein's attitude towards this matter was a tacit acquiesce. On the one hand, the spiritual perception enhancement one gained from the savant pathway's advancement was rather limited. Melissa wouldn't really hear or see what she shouldn't. On the other hand, with the impending apocalypse, the madness caused by the low-sequence potions would further decrease. Furthermore, there was also him, a miracle invoker to help lower the risk of her losing control.
For an avid fan of machinery, a Sequence 9 savant is enough. Moment shares the same attitude. He doesn't wish for a believer of the Evernight to obtain too many potions from the Church of Steam. Yes, the apocalypse is approaching, and the invisible barrier is weakening. The intrusion of this world by the outer deities will become more and more obvious. The chances of ordinary people encountering Beyonder incidents will definitely gradually increase. From this point of view, it's also a good thing for Melissa to become a Beyonder. If she can successfully advance to Sequence 6, artisan, or a machinery specialist, then she can fulfill her dreams and protect herself and Benson. I'll get Miss Justice to find an opportunity to disclose the acting method to Melissa in a discreet manner. The extent of her future growth will depend on her. At most, I can give her some good luck, formulas and ingredients. I'm really like an older brother who can't rest easily. Heh, I've been like this since the beginning. Does this count as granting a wish, in a certain sense? Wait, Melissa definitely wishes for Klein to come back to life. If I were to walk right in front of her, would I receive enough feedback? Forget it. This will bring her and Benson a devastating disaster.
Klein shook his head and stopped himself from making excuses. He then pressed down on his top hat and turned towards a hotel by the streets. He took out a gold pound and got a room, Goka. The gold pound was real. It was an item that Klein had brought back to the real world some time ago. In the previous war, Klein had donated 14,800 pounds in cash, 14,200 pounds worth of gold bars, and nearly 20 high-quality gems through Miss Justice. Apart from all the strange items left on the junk pile, he only had 39 Lowen gold coins and 10 high-quality gems left. Glancing at the hotel owner's returning change in Solian pennies, Klein put them away and entered the room before walking to the full-length mirror. Right on the heels of that, he took out a pen and paper and drew the incantation that summoned Arrodes. Seconds and minutes passed, but nothing abnormal happened. The full-body mirror remained silent. A few seconds later, Klein chuckled and raised his eyebrows. He took out a gold coin from his pocket. Chug, chug, chug! A steam locomotive that was spewing thick smoke tore across the rail, heading west of the continent. The disheveled Icancer and a machinery hive mind member stood in a particular carriage as they focused on the metal cage in front of them. The metal spikes above the cage extended outwards in all kinds of menacing ways, coruscating with a dim light. The machinery hive mind member, who had the looks of a typical Loanese citizen, looked out the window at the planes, rapidly sweeping past them. He couldn't help but ask, "Deacon, are you planning on returning to Lowen after reaching Intis?" After the war ended, the Church of Steam, who had taken the wrong side, had no choice but to bear the consequences of its actions. It had to transfer all beyonders above that of demigods and sealed artifacts above grade 2 out of Lowen within a time period set by the two churches of Evernight and Storm. In other words, they had lost their original status. In the future, they could only maintain a small number of cathedrals, just like the Church of Earth Mother in Lowen. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many people who believed in the god of steam and machinery, and some of them being key figures in the reconstruction efforts after the war, the Church of Steam might not have been able to retain such treatment. Similarly, a smaller number of cathedrals only required a small number of machinery hive mind members. Most of the Beyonders in Lowen had to migrate to Intis. Econser fell silent for a few seconds before smiling bitterly. I have to heed the Archbishop's arrangements, but I will take the initiative to request a return to Lowen. That's where my childhood, teenage, and young adult life was. There are too many memories that I can't forget. As he spoke, his gaze grew distant, and he seemed to see the capital of capitals. At this moment, the metal cage that was overgrown with spikes suddenly trembled. Silver bolts of lightning appeared out of nowhere and landed one after another. They were all absorbed by the metal cage, and through a few wires wrapped in rubber, the current flowed to the ground outside the steam locomotive, dragging out a line of sparks. Bang! 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 The metal cage seemed to be hit by an invisible hand, but it was unable to break the barrier. The magic mirror's reaction is very intense. It's always been very quiet in the past. The machinery hive mind member who had been asking was rather puzzled. Amidst the banging, Icancer subconsciously touched his hair. That's not the case. It will sometimes show its crazy side. If it wasn't for what had happened, we would have still treated it as a grade 2 sealed artifact. Is that so? Heh, I haven't come into contact with it before, so it might just be me, but it feels to me that the magic mirror doesn't want to leave Backland. The machinery hive mind member teased with a smile. Pah! Lightning struck and was absorbed by the metal cage. Bang! 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 The slamming sounds dragged on slowly, as though it was making its last, helpless cry. Icancer took out an old and exquisite pocket watch and opened it. It only lasted 2 minutes. It's much better than in the morning. Just as the member of the machinery hive mind who had just been transferred over was about to ask, he suddenly heard the slamming sound stop abruptly. It was as though it had been affected by some factor that it couldn't put up resistance to. "This is the style of the magic mirror?" he asked. Icancer frowned slightly and said, "No, normally speaking, it wouldn't have the strength to last 20 to 30 seconds. Something's wrong." "Deacon, don't worry, there is a powerful figure on board the train, one who outranks the archbishops." The machinery hive mind member beside him consoled him indifferently. There were too many dangerous sealed artifacts on the steam locomotive. Without a powerful figure watching them, there would definitely be problems. Icancer nodded, indicating that he wasn't worried. Klein was sitting in a conjured carriage in a hamlet's path more than 10 kilometers away from the steam locomotive. In front of him was a mirror. Just as he finished outlining the symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying, a wave of light suffused the mirror as golden Loanese text appeared.
Exalted Great Master, you're finally here. Your puny, loyal, and poor servant, Arrodes, misses you.
Klein couldn't accept the enthusiasm behind this line as he shrank back indiscernibly. If Arrodes' previous attempts to curry favor still maintained a hint of dignity, it was now complete fawning over him. Klein could even detect a hint of crying. Klein teased Arrodes with a smile.
The frequency of amorous news popping up in Trier is far higher than in Backland. It should be a place that you're fond of.
That's because you don't wish to go to Trier.
The golden words on the surface of the mirror faded their colors, turning a faint silver. Klein secretly clicked his tongue.
I have something to ask you.
Please ask.
Arrodes replied humbly. Klein went straight to the point.
Do you know who Earth Mother is?
The mirror instantly turned dark as the faint silver words turned palish white.
I don't know. But during the War of Gods, I heard a voice coming from deep within tenebrous heaven. He shouted a name. That's the true name of the sanguine ancestor.
This magic mirror didn't dare to directly present Lilith's name.
Lilith? It's actually Lilith.
Klein was surprised, but he also felt that this answered many of his questions. Then he thought of the moon Emlyn. This vampire kept going in circles, imagining all kinds of developments, only to have never changed his faith.
If Emlyn had Anderson's personality, he would definitely say to the Sanguines, Grand Duke, and Marquises, "Hey, are you also coming to believe in the Mother Goddess?"
As Klein imagined the funny scene, he said to Arrodes,
"It's your turn to ask."
Supreme Master, please continue asking. I'll ask it all at once towards the end.
The palish white words regained their faint silver luster. Klein thought for a moment before saying,
How's the situation like now? For example, the situation in FASAC.
Chapter 1274, The Stabilization of the Situation. On the surface of the mirror, silver words surfaced one by one amidst the aqueous light. Adopt beyonders from the Church of the God of Combat and the FASAC military, who are willing to pledge their loyalty. Only the extremely pious, faithful, and those willing to be martyrs, as well as a few mid and upper echelon members of the Church, are to be eliminated. This is both the benevolence and compassion of the goddess, as well as the necessary measures to deal with the subsequent situation. With the apocalypse approaching, the number of Beyonder incidents will inevitably increase all across the world. To maintain the stability of the world, we have to do our best to increase our strength as quickly as possible. If we were to call the Beyonders of the Church of the God of Combat and the FASAC military, obtaining their corresponding characteristics, that still doesn't aid us in nurturing a Beyonder of the same level within a few years. A Beyonder with rich experience, be it in their digesting of the potion or accumulated knowledge, requires a sufficient amount of time. Upon seeing this, Klein mumbled inwardly. He felt that this wasn't the usual tone of Arrodes. It was more like an official document.
It's showing documents of unknown origins that it peeped at. By using words like digesting, it means that both the writer and the reader have mastered the acting method. And from the tone of the document, it's from the Church of Evernight. Based on these 2 points, it's not difficult to tell that these documents are for the eyes of archbishops and high-ranking deacons. The author should be the Apostolic See from the Cathedral of Serenity. Arrodes' secret prying abilities are very impressive.
Klein nodded indiscernibly as he waited for the contents in the mirror to flip the page. The silver words vanished one after another, quickly forming new sentences and paragraphs. There's no need to spread the fact that the goddess has replaced the God of Combat to the ordinary nobles and citizens of FASAC. This allows them to retain their faith in the God of Combat. On the one hand, it's beneficial for us and the priests, bishops, and various major cathedrals who have surrendered to us. It will stabilize the situation in FASAC in the quickest way possible. On the other hand, it also prevents the goddess from being disturbed by the unresolvable problem of faith before she completely gains control of the God of Combat's authority. An update will be disseminated after a new revelation is given. Now, we will only draw up the corresponding draft. Try not to incite the strong resistance of FASAC and other countries. We've lost too many Beyonders and soldiers, and we have expended a large amount of resources and items. Be it the Church, the countries, or the people of different classes, we are all very weak. We need some time of peace and stability to recover. We should work with the Church of Storms, the Church of Knowledge, the Church of Earth Mother, countries like Fina Potter or Lemberg. We will force Intis and FASAC to make an unconditional surrender. We will obtain what we hope for at the negotiation table. During this process, we can use the purging of the stubborn, old-fashioned faithful to exert pressure on them. When dealing with the domestic situation and the filling of the void left behind by the Church of Steam, the Church of Storms should be given enough respect. We can even make concessions on certain matters. This is the will of the goddess. Finally, from this moment forth, the number of times the crimson moon that appears in the sermons, preaching, rituals, and masses should be reduced. In official canon, the goddess's title of Lady of Crimson shall no longer be mentioned. Lady of Crimson shall no longer be mentioned. Klein's brows twitched as he felt a strong sense of confusion towards the last sentence. Soon he thought of the sanguine ancestor, the ancient god of the second epoch, and the present Earth Mother, Lilith, who was once a sequence 0 of the moon pathway. She was the true Lady of Crimson. In a moment of enlightenment, he vaguely understood that this might be an exchange under the table. It was a necessary price.
Yes, the goddess's attitude is very clear, that is, to stabilize the situation as quickly as possible, before she truly controls the authority of death and that of the god of combat, and becomes a great old one. She undoubtedly doesn't wish for any more orthodox deities to perish. If that happened, the invisible barrier left behind by the primordial one will have no one to mend it. This will allow the outer deities to find an opportunity to bring the apocalypse forward. Also, based on Lowen's present situation, if we continue the war, the anchors will waver even more. It might lead to the awakening of the primordial one in the goddess. The goddess took a huge risk having the frontline retreat all the way to Backland. She had to divert more strength to suppress the primordial one. If Earth Mother betrayed her, she might have perished even faster than the god of combat. Could she have other trump cards? The losses that the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of Storms suffered seems quite significant. It's no wonder that after the Resistance announced that they would retain the corresponding cathedrals and respect the Storm religion, that bunch of irascible fellows didn't attempt to retaliate, and they silently agreed to the establishment of the new government.
Klein mumbled to himself as he had a rough idea of the current situation. He asked a third question.
If the Evernight Goddess wants to advance further, does she need to find the River of Eternal Darkness?
This was one of the 9 Sephiro. Klein remembered Arrodes mentioning it once, saying that this river was related to the ancient death, the phoenix ancestor Grace. The clues seemed to be hidden deep in the spirit world's Calderon city. The silver words twisted and distorted, forming new text.
Yes, Great Master. The death at the end of the 4th epoch should have been able to use the River of Eternal Darkness. He attempted to use the Sapphira to forcefully accommodate the uniqueness of non-neighboring pathways. Then, he went mad.
So that was how Death went mad back then. I knew it. A sequence 0 true god, one who has lived for 3 epochs and has seen the blasphemy slate, wouldn't lack common sense and randomly drink potions. It's not like he is a Lista tutor, having reached a point of only having the options of madness or death. It's no wonder Death challenged the fractured 7 deities with just a primordial demoness. Back then, he was equivalent to half a great old one. Yes, Mr. Isaac had a golden phoenix accessory that came from Death.
Klein strung up certain matters. Suddenly, he inwardly let out an exclamation. He suspected that the price of so many bestowments was the River of Eternal Darkness. Just like how the true Creator had repeatedly tolerated him so as to force him into the Giant King's residence to obtain the first blasphemy slate. As the owner of Sapphira Castle, he was probably the only relatively high sequence beyonder who could resist the corruption of other Sephiro. Of course, the Evernight Goddess could also wait up to a decade or so. After the primordial one's will faded further, she could personally retrieve it. However, this way, Klein wasn't sure if she could complete the ritual before the apocalypse happened. He composed himself and raised the 4th question.
Where can I get the potion formula for Attendant of Mysteries?
Arrodes made the silver words reassemble into brand new content.
Zeratul, 1st blasphemy slate, 2nd blasphemy slate, the card of blasphemy, the fool uniqueness that has become a mythical creature.
The first choice and second choice might be plotting against me. Zeratul is even more terrifying and cunning than the dark demonic wolf. If I were to plot against him, there's a high chance of me falling into his trap. The danger is extremely high. The third choice is Amon's brother. He should have used this war to become a visionary. If I were to provoke him, Sapphira Castle might not be able to save me. The 4th and 5th options are related to the half-fool of the Antigonus family. It's related to the goddess's foggy town. The goddess should have a way to circle around the half-fool and extract the card of blasphemy, but perhaps I'll need to use the River of Eternal Darkness to exchange for it.
Klein realized that he had reached a dead end. The path ahead was the river of eternal darkness, and behind him was the leader of the secret order, Zaratul.
Unfortunately, if I can find the dark demonic wolf, I can try to negotiate with him. He should have seen the first blasphemy slate and grasped the potion formula of Attendant of Mysteries. Sigh, he will flee far away once he smells me.
Klein thought for a moment and said to Arrodes,
Fifth question, what did you mean when you said you saw a pillar in support from me?
The aqueous light in the mirror swirled slightly as the deepness became more obvious. The corresponding silver text seemed to turn a little whiter.
Great Master, this is a feeling that I can't describe using words. However, I've experienced similar feelings in another existence before. Apart from him, only you possess it. That existence is the ancient sun god.
The ancient sun god.
Klein nodded in thought.
All right, it's your turn to ask.
On the surface of the mirror, the words on the silver screen suddenly turned golden.
Supreme Master, do you think you can take away your loyal and humble servant, Arrodes? Supreme Master, do you think you can take away your loyal and humble servant, Arrodes?
This question appeared 5 times in a row, completely covering the surface of the mirror. Having become an angel, Klein no longer feared Arrodes. After thinking for a few seconds, he smiled and said,
Let me talk to that angel. This is basic courtesy.
With a boom, illusory beams of different colors spewed out from the mirror and exploded into fireworks in the carriage. Almost at the same time, 2 dark rays of light reached out from the edge of the mirror. 2 arms that appeared surreal grew out. The 2 arms originally wanted to reach out to Klein's calf, but they silently shrank back and gently swayed on the spot.
Praise the Supreme Master.
After the fireworks fell, a golden message appeared in the mirror. In the middle section of the steam locomotive, in a simple room, a tall and handsome young man with long chestnut hair sat on a hardwood chair. Facing the triangular sacred emblem, he clasped his hands and closed his eyes as he sincerely prayed. On the side of the narrow table was a mannequin made of metal components. Behind the mannequin was a faint meshed glow. Suddenly, the young man opened his eyes and looked towards the other side. Someone had appeared there, and in the young man's blue eyes, the figure only looked like a person. In essence, it was an invisible vortex wearing a silk top hat and a black trench coat. Inside the vortex, there were transparent and distorted maggots squirming about in the cluster. The young man calmly read out a name. German Sparrow. All the items around him floated up, but there was no wind in the room. Klein pressed his top hat and revealed his human face.
How may I address you?
The young man nodded slightly and said, Bornova Gustav, Chapter 1275, A New Journey, Bornova Gustav. Klein's gaze swept across the young man's face, landing on the floating items and the mannequin made from metallic components. Klein nodded in thought.
The mannequins have a postmodern style. Some of the physical laws here seem to have changed a little. I want to take the mirror.
He very honestly stated his request. Bornova's expression didn't change, as though he was just a puppet. You're a blessed of Evernight?
I guess so.
Bornova nodded. Then take it away. Klein didn't explain, as he politely took off his hat and bowed slightly.
He's of the impression that I'm asking for the spoils of war for the Church of Evernight. Hey, Shav, Prati, thank you very much.
As he spoke, Klein's figure suddenly faded and vanished. He had only come in the form of a historical void projection. Following that, in the carriage where Iconser and the Machinery Hivemind member were, nothing happened. Of course, they were only situated in a historical scene, and the actual situation in the car had been covered up without their knowledge. On a carriage more than 10 kilometers away, a mirror suddenly appeared in Klein's hand. It was silver in color, and the patterns on its back were ancient and mysterious. On both sides was an eye-like ornament. Klein looked into the mirror and gave a simple instruction.
Don't speak.
Yes, Supreme Master.
Silver words surfaced from the depths of the mirror. Klein immediately took out a pen and paper and used the magic mirror as a backing to write. He thought for a moment and wrote with a faint smile.
Dear Mr. Azek, it seems like I haven't written to you for a long time, as I went to the forsaken land of the gods and had a wonderful journey. There are only two types of living creatures there. They are either living sentient creatures or monsters. Those sentient beings either bear a curse or have obvious physical mutations. They're even more tragic than I imagined. I tried helping them. This wasn't only for the ritual, for my anchors, or to satisfy my sympathetic heart. It holds meaning on its own. Putting aside the suffering, the situation in the forsaken land of the gods is completely different from the outside world. It's like an oil painting with a black theme. What's surprising is that artificial death can influence the undying creatures there. I was very confused back then, but today, I finally had a guess. I suspect that this is related to the river of eternal darkness, one of the 9 Sephiroth. This reminds me of Calderon City in the spirit world. I'm reminded of the golden phoenix accessory you mentioned before. Rumor has it that the phoenix ancestor, Death of the 4th Epoch, could use the river of eternal darkness to a certain extent. I wonder if you know anything about this. The war that lasted for more than 1 year has finally ended. The Evernight goddess clinched victory in the end, and the god of combat has perished. I believe that, with your level and status, you should know what this means. No matter what, the long-awaited peace has finally arrived. People are gradually returning to their normal lives. This is a scene that I like to see, but some wounds may never heal. I don't know if the apocalypse will arrive on time, and I don't know when you'll wake up. I can only hope that everything's heading in the right direction. Finally, let me mention something trivial. I've already advanced to Sequence 2, and am now a miracle invoker. This is both a curse and hope. I wish you well. Your eternal student, Klein Moretti.
After he finished writing, Klein examined it carefully before folding the letter. He blew Ezek's copper whistle and summoned the bone messenger. When the gigantic messenger emerged from the ground, its bones trembled as though it had sensed the aura of the great ruler above the spirit world. Klein chuckled softly and handed the letter to the messenger, whose number was unknown. He watched it clumsily bow before disintegrating into a fountain and burrowing into the ground. After doing this, Klein cast his gaze at the magic mirror on his thigh. Sensing his gaze, the aqueous light on the surface of the mirror rippled and produced silver words.
Great Master, where are we going next?
Klein repeated the question inwardly.
Where to next?
He really wanted to teleport to the main peak of the Hornassus mountain range and enter the ancient palace that bordered reality and Foggy Town. He wanted to see if he had the chance to take away the most useful card of blasphemy from the Antigonus family's half-fool. With his present strength being equivalent to half a Sequence 1, this wasn't an impossible task. Back when Zaratul was a Sequence 2, he had managed to obtain the main ingredient of Attendant of Mysteries from the half-fool. Of course, the premise was that the Evernight goddess maintained the suppression and seal of the Antigonus family's ancestor. Hence, he had gone full circle, circling back to a deal with the Evernight goddess. Klein quickly analyzed the situation.
The present me is the owner of Sephira Castle. I can split a portion of the worms of spirit to stay above the gray fog, constantly responding to any prayers. This way, apart from having certain latent problems to my mental state, I'll gain quite a bit of benefits in other aspects. Yes, I can help my main body at any time, giving me another resurrection method. Even if my main body is completely destroyed, with the worms of spirit above the gray fog, I can still reassemble my will and body. However, if I were to walk in the real world and get concealed, and also end up having my connection with Sephira Castle severed, the worms of spirit left in Sephira Castle will lose control and turn into monsters, just like Zaratul from back then.
With his current strength, he felt that it was best if he didn't venture deep into Calderon City for the time being. Even if he were to search for clues regarding the River of Eternal Darkness, he would have to fulfill many wishes and obtain the true strength of a miracle invoker. With this in mind, Klein patted the mirror and said with a smile,
Next, let's go wander together. Where do you want to go?
Trier, no, you can go wherever you want.
Arrodes replied humbly. Klein smiled and jumped off the carriage, heading towards the city closest to him. After the carriage continued for several meters, it disappeared inch by inch and returned to the fog of history. At the same time, Klein's trench coat turned into a black robe. His top hat changed in shape, giving off a classic vibe. This made Klein feel like a wandering magician walking through the streets and alleys. Dressed in holy white robes, the beautiful demoness of unaging, Katerina, put down the mirror in her hand and turned her head to the young man who was rocking in a reclining chair.
The war is over. They finally decided to summon me back to headquarters.
I've been waiting for this day for too long.
The young man sitting on a reclining chair scoffed. He was wearing a long black robe with red patterns. He had a pale white brown-skinned face with a soft outline. He was the gatekeeper possessed by the red angel evil spirit. Katerina pressed down on the table with both hands and sat on it. The corners of her lips curled up as she said,
You don't seem testy at all.
When you get locked underground with two detestable fellows for nearly 2,000 years without being able to escape, you'll know that 2 years of waiting is extremely easy and relaxing. I'm not in a rush at all. After this matter ends, I'll let you experience it. Of course, I'll remember to throw you 2 male companions. As for how long you can last, it's up to you to decide if you can hold yourself back.
The red angel evil spirit said with a chuckle. As he said this, the red angel evil spirit's 2 cheeks didn't reveal any retorting mouths. This was because, to them, this was the truth. They and 2 other detestable fellows had been locked underground for nearly 2,000 years without any means of escape. Upon hearing this answer, Katerina's eyes darted around as she asked with a faint smile,
Aren't you worried that Primordial would learn of this once you head to our headquarters?
So what? There's always a need to take risks in doing things. Furthermore, the worst outcome is to fuse with her. I'm already 3-in-1, so becoming 4-in-1 isn't a problem.
Sauron Einhorn Medici said with a nonchalant attitude.
Let's set off.
Katerina hopped off the table with a smile. Just as she finished speaking, a red-haired man with a trademark imprint on his forehead was reflected in her eyes. The gatekeeper, who wore a black, red-patterned robe, stopped breathing. His skin and flesh rapidly rotted, turning into yellow-green pus. In just a few seconds, there was only a white skeleton and a Beyonder characteristic left on the reclining chair. Katerina waved her hand, pulling the Beyonder characteristic over by using invisible threads. It fell into her palm. Immediately after, she lost all corporealness and suddenly entered the mirror she had used before. A dark and illusory path that appeared surreal presented itself in front of the Saintess of White. It formed a complicated and mysterious web with similar objects in her surroundings, interweaving into a strange world that was different from reality. Katerina quickly traversed the mirror world and approached the target node. At that moment, she felt a powerful suction force. She couldn't help but deviate from the path and cast a dark and blurry fog. It represented a mirror in the real world. In an instant, Katerina, along with the red angel evil spirit, left the mirror and came to an unfamiliar room covered in carpets. At the edge of the room, a young man with ordinary facial features who was dressed in common clothes leaned against the staircase railings and smiled at the demoness of white. His left hand was constantly tossing an item, a strange crown covered in rust and blood. Before Katerina could react, the young man took out a crystal monocle and put it on his left eye. The red angel evil spirit's sneer echoed in Katerina's mind.
Huh.
The next second, the young man took off the monocle and shifted it to his right eye before saying with a smile,
Sorry, I wore it in the wrong spot.